When Army Ranger Maya Brooks returned home to Asheville, a group of protesters humiliated her in public, tearing away her veteran pin and dignity for the world to see. Led by Travis Cole, their cruelty twisted strength into threat, and their lies soon spread online, branding her the villain of her own story. But when Maya stood before the entire town in her full uniform, her calm truth silenced hate louder than any shout could. And just wait until you hear how that single act of courage turned disgrace into triumph, and how justice finally stood tall beside her. It was one of those Carolina mornings that felt too calm to be real, the air soft, the sun gentle, and the streets of Asheville washed in the quiet hum of a weekend routine. But beneath that calm, something uneasy lingered. The town had always worn a polite smile, yet behind it the old cracks of division never quite healed. Sergeant Maya Brooks had returned home just a week before. At 33, she had already lived through more than most people twice her age, 12 years of service, 3 deployments, and countless missions where courage was the only currency that mattered. But this morning, she wanted none of that. She wasn't Sergeant Brooks anymore. She was just Maya, a daughter, a neighbor, a woman trying to find her footing in the world she'd protected from afar. She parked her old silver sedan near Main Street Cafe, the same place her father used to take her on Sundays before church. Her plan was simple: grab a coffee, stop by the cemetery, and maybe, for the first time in years, breathe without waiting for an order or a radio call. But peace has a way of vanishing the moment you start believing in it. Down the block, a group of protesters had gathered. They waved flags from another century, shouting about tradition, heritage, and their country. Their voices clashed with the morning calm, raw, loud, full of something that wasn't pride, but bitterness dressed up as it. Maya noticed them as she stepped out of her car. She wasn't afraid. She'd learned long ago that fear never solved anything, but she felt a tension in her chest, the kind that comes when you sense that a situation could go wrong fast. As she locked her car and adjusted her cap, a truck rolled by, its engine growling louder than it needed to. From the driver's seat, a man leaned out and shouted, "Hey! You're in the wrong neighborhood, girl." At first, she thought maybe he was talking to someone else. She turned slightly, scanning the sidewalk. But then she saw the stares, the faces, the way people slowed down, watching. A few of the protesters, 3 men and 1 woman, broke away from their group and started walking toward her. They weren't rushing, but there was purpose in their steps, the kind that made everyone else nearby quietly back away. One man held up his phone, recording as he sneered, "You think you belong here, wearing that American flag on your hat?" Maya's fingers brushed the brim of her cap, the same one she'd worn home from her final mission. It wasn't just fabric, it was memory, sacrifice. Every person she'd served with was stitched into that symbol. She didn't answer, not because she didn't have words, but because she'd learned that silence sometimes spoke louder than shouting. "Say something," another man barked. His accent was thick, his tone mocking. "Come on, don't go quiet now." The woman with them laughed, recording from another angle. "She thinks she's special. Probably one of those who blames everyone else." The third man, broad-shouldered and smirking, stepped closer and looked at the pin on her jacket, a small metal badge worn from years of service. Without warning, he reached out, snatched it off, and threw it onto the pavement. "You didn't earn that," he said. "You people never do." The world seemed to still for a moment. The sound of traffic faded. Maya looked at the pin lying in the dust. something so small, yet carrying more weight than any of them could ever understand. Her throat tightened. She felt every insult, every glare, every ounce of contempt they had hurled, not just at her, but at everything she represented. The anger came quietly at first, a deep and steady pulse that began somewhere behind her ribs and moved upward like fire. But it wasn't the kind of anger that burned out of control. It was measured, sharp, the kind that builds into purpose. Maya bent down slowly, picked up the pin, brushed off the dust, and pinned it back to her jacket. Her movements were calm, almost ceremonial. She didn't look at them when she did it. She didn't need to, because the truth was, they didn't deserve her words. When she finally stood, her eyes met the man's for a moment, not with fury, not even with disgust, but with something stronger, the unspoken message that no amount of hate could undo who she was. Maya didn't fight back that day. She had stood there, shoulders squared and heart steady, while their words cut through the air like small, deliberate blades. When they tossed her veteran pin into the dirt, she had simply bent down, picked it up, brushed it clean, and walked away. The laughter had followed her, sharp, echoing, feeding on its own cruelty. But once the noise faded and the streets emptied, silence became her only companion. And that silence, not the insults, not the stares, was what truly broke her. By evening, the golden light had drained from her apartment, leaving behind the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock above her kitchen sink. Maya sat at the small table her father had built years ago, a mug of untouched coffee in front of her. Outside, the world moved on, cars passing, neighbors chatting, someone's dog barking at a shadow. Inside, she sat completely still, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. What she saw wasn't the soldier who had commanded respect in uniform, the one who had led rescue operations through storms of uncertainty and fear. What she saw was someone smaller, quieter, almost erased. Her own face looked like a stranger's, tired, uncertain, caught between strength and sorrow. 12 years of service, and this was the welcome home. She rubbed her arm, where a faint bruise had started to form from when one of the men had shoved past her in the crowd. She hadn't even realized it at the time. Adrenaline had hidden the sting. Pride had hidden the rest. But now it pulsed faintly, a dull reminder of the day's ugliness. A knock came at her door. When she opened it, Evelyn Harper stood there, her neighbor from across the hall. Evelyn was in her late 70s, hair like silver thread, voice always kind but firm. She had known Maya's parents when they were still alive. "Oh, honey," Evelyn said softly, her eyes landing on the bruise. "What happened to you?" Maya shook her head, forcing a small smile. "It's nothing, Evelyn." "Just a bad day," Evelyn frowned. "Doesn't look like nothing." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, setting down the casserole dish she'd brought. "I saw the video," she said finally. Maya froze. "Video?" Evelyn nodded, her face tightening. "Someone filmed what happened on Main Street." "It's all over the internet." Maya's heart sank as Evelyn pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward her. There it was, shaky footage of her standing silently while voices shouted around her, but the caption above it stole her breath. "Aggressive black woman threatens peaceful protesters." She watched in disbelief as thousands of comments scrolled beneath the post, strangers calling her names, twisting the story, making her the villain in her own humiliation. Her silence, once a mark of restraint, had been rewritten as guilt. Evelyn reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You can't let them get away with that, Maya." Maya didn't answer right away. She stared at the screen, the reflection of the false words flickering in her eyes. She had faced enemies before, visible, armed, and clear in their intent. But this was different. This enemy hid behind screens, behind words that could destroy a reputation faster than any bullet could touch the body. Her chest ached, not from fear, but from betrayal. Then her phone began to buzz. Messages poured in, familiar names, her brothers and sisters from the army. "You good, Ranger?" "We saw it." "We got your 6. They don't get to write your story." Each message felt like a small light breaking through the darkness that had settled around her. These were people who knew her truth, who had seen her stand in storms and never flinch. She set the phone down, the messages still glowing on the screen. For a long time, Maya sat in silence. Evelyn stayed by her side, saying nothing more, just offering the quiet comfort of presence. Outside, rain began to fall softly, tapping against the window pane like a steady heartbeat. Maya turned back to her reflection in the glass. For the first time that night, she didn't see the broken image of a woman defeated. She saw someone wounded, yes, but still standing. The pain had settled deep, not just from the insult or the lies, but from what they represented, the erasure of her story, the rewriting of her truth. But pain, she knew, could either hollow you out or harden your resolve. As the rain deepened and thunder murmured in the distance, she made a quiet decision. She would not let them define her. She would not let her silence be mistaken for weakness, and she would not let hate have the final word. That night, beneath the hum of the storm, Maya Brooks opened her laptop, took a steady breath, and began to write. Not for revenge, but for justice, for truth. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with a choice to be seen. 3 days later, Asheville's town hall buzzed with tension. The city had called a community meeting to address recent events, though everyone knew it was about the video, the one that had spread across the country, igniting outrage, arguments, and division. Local news crews filled the back of the room. Reporters checked their microphones. Police officers stood near the walls, arms folded, watching. At the front sat the mayor, trying to look composed, and in the crowd were the same faces that had cornered Maya that morning on Main Street. Travis Cole sat in the 3rd row, chin raised, his group whispering among themselves. Their flags weren't allowed inside, but their scowls carried the same message. The meeting began with speeches about unity and understanding, words that floated around the room like paper birds, fragile, pretty, and weightless. Then the mayor cleared his throat. "We have among us today someone directly affected by the incident that has caused such division. Sergeant First Class Maya Brooks has requested to speak." The murmurs started immediately. Surprise, doubt, disbelief. Cameras tilted toward the door. When Maya walked in, the room fell silent. She wasn't in plain clothes this time. She was in her full Army Ranger uniform, pressed and perfect, medals glinting under the fluorescent lights. Every ribbon, every insignia told a story, not of rank or vanity, but of survival, sacrifice, and steadfast purpose. Her posture was unyielding, her eyes clear. She didn't have to demand respect. Her presence commanded it. She stepped up to the microphone. The soft click of her boots echoed through the room. For a long moment, she said nothing, and in that silence, everyone watched her, waiting. When she finally spoke, Her voice carried the calm strength of someone who had stood in storms far greater than this. "I've been called a lot of things this week," she began. "A liar, an outsider, even a threat." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience, landing briefly on the protesters who wouldn't meet her eyes. "But let me tell you who I am," she continued. "I'm Sergeant First Class Maya Brooks, United States Army Ranger, service number 68,429, 12 years of service, 3 tours overseas, and 1 promise: to defend this country." All of it, the words hung in the air like a banner of truth. Travis Cole shifted in his seat. The room was utterly still except for the faint hum of cameras recording. "I fought for your freedom to speak," Maya said, her tone neither angry nor bitter. "But freedom doesn't give anyone the right to silence someone else's dignity. You can wave any flag you want, but the flag I fought for belongs to every American, not just the ones who look or think like you." Her voice strengthened, resonating with quiet conviction. "You attacked me because you thought I was weak. Because you mistook patience for submission. But courage, real courage, doesn't come from skin color or from shouting the loudest. It comes from character." Somewhere near the back, a single person began to clap. It was hesitant at first, one pair of hands breaking through the quiet. Then another joined, and another. Within seconds, the room erupted in applause. The sound swelled until it drowned out the few angry shouts that tried to rise against it. Even the mayor stood, clapping along with the crowd. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled to capture every word, every frame. Maya stepped back from the microphone, offering a small nod of gratitude. She didn't smile broadly, just the faintest curve of calm resolve. Outside, as the meeting ended and she stepped into the crisp October air, a crowd of reporters waited. Microphones and questions flew toward her like a sudden storm. "Maya, what message do you want to send to those who attacked you?" one reporter asked. She stopped, looked directly into one of the cameras, and said simply, "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth." That was all. No rehearsed speech, no anger, just truth, steady, clear, and impossible to twist. The next morning, headlines across the country carried her name again, but this time with a different story. "Army Ranger teaches hate a lesson in courage." "Veteran's speech turns Asheville incident into a moment of unity." "From humiliation to heroism, Sergeant Maya Brooks stands tall." Within days, investigators reviewed the full video footage. The edited clips that had painted her as the aggressor were exposed as false. New evidence surfaced, including uncut recordings that showed Travis Cole and his group initiating the confrontation. Charges followed: assault and public incitement. And while the legal process moved forward, something deeper had already changed. Strangers sent letters of support. Veterans' organizations invited her to speak. Young people shared her words across social media, quoting the line that had resonated most: "Courage doesn't come from skin color, it comes from character." The air was crisp that morning, touched with the quiet chill of late autumn. The trees along the cemetery road stood half bare, their remaining leaves trembling in the soft wind. Maya walked slowly along the path, her boots crunching over fallen leaves, the scent of earth and pine mixing with the faint sweetness of the flowers she carried. It had been several weeks since the town hall meeting, weeks filled with interviews, letters, and messages from strangers around the world. Some called her brave. Others called her an example of what America could still be. But Maya didn't think of herself that way. To her, she had simply done what she was trained to do, stand her ground, not with weapons or orders, but with truth. She stopped at her father's grave, a simple white stone, weathered and strong, engraved with his name, Thomas Brooks, U.S. Army, faithful to the end. For a long moment, she said nothing. She just stood there, letting the quiet settle around her like an old friend. Then she knelt, setting down the flowers, fresh lilies and wild daisies, the kind her father always brought home after Sunday walks. Beside them, she placed the small veteran pin, the same one that had once been tossed in the dirt by hands that thought they could strip it of meaning. Its silver edge glinted faintly in the morning light. She whispered, almost to herself, "They tried to break this, Dad, but it's stronger than they'll ever understand." The words carried on the wind, soft and steady. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe fully, not the shallow, cautious breaths of defense, but the deep kind that comes when the soul finally unclenches. The chaos had passed, but the meaning of it lingered. She had stood for herself, yes, but she had also stood for every person who'd ever been told to shrink, to disappear, to endure in silence. As she rose to her feet, she noticed movement near the cemetery gate. A little girl, maybe 9 or 10, was walking hesitantly toward her, clutching a small notebook to her chest. Her hair was braided neatly, and she wore a bright red jacket that stood out against the gray morning. "Miss Brooks?" the girl asked shyly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya turned, surprised. "Yes?" The girl looked down, almost nervous, then back up again. "I saw you on TV. My mom says you're a hero." For a moment, Maya didn't know what to say. She smiled softly, the corners of her eyes warming. "Heroes are just people who refuse to stay silent," she said finally. The girl nodded thoughtfully, the words sinking in deeper than she probably realized. Then, with a small but determined gesture, she raised her hand in a salute, her posture careful, her expression serious. Maya's heart swelled. She returned the salute, her hand trembling slightly. The sunlight caught her uniform at just the right angle, and for a moment it felt as though her father was standing beside her again, proud, unspoken, watching. Tears stung her eyes, but they weren't born of pain. They came from pride, from knowing that even after everything, something good had taken root in the aftermath. The girl's mother called from the gate, and the child ran off, waving one last time. Maya watched her go, smiling through the ache in her chest. The world hadn't transformed overnight. The same divisions still lingered, tucked into corners of conversations and slogans. Hate didn't vanish with one speech or one headline. It adapted, waited, found new masks. But something had shifted, at least here, in this small North Carolina town. For once, people had been forced to look beyond their fear and see the strength in grace, the power in restraint, and the truth in quiet defiance. Maya reached down and straightened the flowers one last time, the wind tugging gently at her sleeve. "I think we did all right, Dad," she murmured. And as she turned to leave, a quiet certainty settled over her. Not triumph in the loud sense, but something quieter and more enduring. The kind of triumph that plants seeds instead of waving flags. She walked back toward the gate, the late morning sun cutting through the trees, painting the path in gold. Each step felt lighter than the last, because in the end, courage isn't something you hang up with your uniform. It isn't a title or a medal. It's a choice, one you make again and again, especially when the world gives you every reason not to. Maya had worn her uniform on battlefields overseas, but here, at home, she had discovered another kind of fight, one where the weapons were truth, dignity, and the refusal to bend. And as the breeze whispered through the cemetery, she understood what her father had always meant when he said, "Courage doesn't end when the war does. Sometimes it just changes uniforms."